Hello and welcome back to Business Today. In today's session, I would like to look back at the COVID-19 crisis. And specifically, I would like to understand whether there are any lasting consequences that can still be felt today. And in order to do that, I would like to look at 5 aspects. The first one is the humanitarian aspect. Then I would like to look at the economy. Third, I would like to take a longer look at businesses and what the impact of the COVID-19 crisis was and is on businesses today. Then a quick look at the stock market, and finally a look at society overall and the impact COVID-19 had on the society. So let's start. The first aspect is the humanitarian aspect. And these are the latest statistics that I could find about COVID-19 cases globally and the death rate as well. So up until 17 February 2024, there have been 703 million confirmed cases. Out of these, 674 million have recovered. The death rate stands at 1%, or 7 million people died from COVID. Next, I would like to look at the economy. When the COVID crisis hit, McKinsey forecasted 9 different scenarios of how the COVID crisis could play out. And this ranged from the most positive scenario, which McKinsey called A4, to the most pessimistic, which was B3. And accordingly, there was a forecast on when the economy would recover. And the most optimistic forecast that the economy would recover in early 2021. The most pessimistic ones forecasted that it would last until 2023, that the economy would recover. So if you look at what actually happened, this is the world economy. So we see that the world economy was impacted in the past 20 years or so by a couple of crises. So there was the 2009 global financial crisis, then the global trade slowdown in 2014, 2015, and then the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we can see is that the world economy was incredibly resilient. The world economy recovered indeed in 2021 already. So we see only a very minor dip to global economic activity. However, some countries took significantly longer or are still taking longer, and this is the example of Thailand. Thailand is forecasted to reach pre-COVID-19 GDP levels only in 2024 or 2025. Actually, the current forecast for 2024 is still slightly below the pre-pandemic level of 2019. So we can see that the economy globally has suffered only shortly, but some countries take much longer to recover. Now I want to take a look at businesses, and specifically at businesses in Thailand. And in terms of consequences, I think we can talk about 4 aspects here. The first aspect is that profitability levels have shifted. Some companies benefited and some companies suffered. The second is debt levels. And here we can see a significant change compared to pre-crisis levels in all 3 aspects: corporate, household, and government debt levels. Then I want to look at inflation, and we see that inflation has actually increased slightly, but has been coming down. And then finally, what some call the great attrition, which is the fact that employees have been quitting and there's a shortage of talent in the market. So let's go through these 4 levels one by one. The first one here, I look at the stock exchange of Thailand, at the 50 largest set-listed companies, those that were in the set 50 before and after the crisis. What we see here is that we have 13 winners of the crisis, and example of these winners are Bumrungrad Hospital, for example, which increased the net profit margin by 7%, and electronics companies like Delta Electronics also benefited from the crisis. So here the profit margin increased by 6%. If we look at the losers, AOT, the airports of Thailand, are still suffering. So the profit margin has dropped by 24 percentage points. And then some of the hotel companies are also still suffering. The profitability levels haven't reached the pre-crisis levels yet. The second aspect is debt. And here first looking at corporate debt, the debt level has increased significantly since 2019. So companies were forced throughout the crisis to take on new debt. And therefore the debt level of, these are the 710 companies listed in the stock exchange of Thailand. The combined level of debt has increased by 38%, so almost 40% increase in debt, in corporate debt. And looking again at the largest companies in the set, we see that 13 companies actually managed to improve their debt levels, while 22 companies are worse off, some of them much worse off than prior to the crisis. The second aspect of debt is household debt. And here, Thailand also has suffered quite a lot. Overall, household debt levels have increased significantly throughout the pandemic. But we see that Thailand is now in the top 10, actually the number 6 of record household debt levels in the world. And what is very specific about this is that Thailand is the only developing country in this list. All the other countries around here are developed countries. And we can see that during the COVID pandemic, or in the year 2019 to 2020, household debt indeed made a big jump from 78% of GDP to 89% of GDP, and it has remained high since then. 2023 has actually seen a new all-time high at 90.7% of GDP household debt here in Thailand. But government debt also has been affected. This is the map of the world in 2007, and what we see here is the government debt expressed in color. So dark green is the best with less than 25% of GDP, and dark red or almost brown is the worst with 100% or more of GDP. So this was 2007. So if I change now, we move to post financial crisis. This is 2018. And what we can see is that some countries already turned red, from green to red, so significantly increasing the the government debt. And then the latest map, which is 2022, some of the previously red countries have shifted to dark red. So the level of government debt has significantly increased around the world. And this is an example of the UK government. So we see here that during the pandemic 2019, the debt has shifted up quite significantly. We also see the previous shift in 2007, after 2007, 2008, the financial crisis. So with every crisis, we see the government debt level increasing, and government debt has stayed high in this example of the UK since 2020. Next is inflation. So inflation fluctuated throughout time, obviously, but stayed, this US inflation stayed at around 2% plus or minus. But with the pandemic, we have seen unprecedented levels of inflation that we haven't seen in the last 25 years. So inflation actually went up to 9% around 2021, 2022. Now inflation has come down, but it is still relatively high, closer to 4%, above 3%. So above the target rate of 2%. Last, I would like to look at the talent landscape. And this is the talent shortage report from Manpower Group before the 2019 crisis, 2020 crisis. In 2018, we have seen some countries struggling with talent shortages. So the number here is the percent of employers who report a shortage of talent. In Japan, for example, it was 89% of employers that complained about talent shortages, while some countries were doing relatively well, like China with 13%, Ireland, UK 18 or 19%, and some of the European countries around 24, 25%. Overall, in 2018, 45% of employers said that they couldn't find the skills that they needed. Now, if we jump to 2023, the latest numbers, this situation has changed significantly. Now, 77% of employers say that they cannot find the skills needed, and there is not a single country that is lower than 60%. So the best country in terms of talent shortage is Colombia, Panama, Czech Republic, and all of them are around 64, 65, 66% of companies complaining about talent shortages. China, that had previously only 13% of companies complaining about the talent landscape, now reports 81% talent shortages. So a significant step up. And here are the numbers, and as we can see, throughout the crisis, the talent shortage has significantly increased. And we can only speculate about the reason for this, but one of the reasons, I assume, is that many people have left their industry, have found jobs in new industries, and as the tourism industry or the industries that have been affected by the COVID crisis are coming back now, these industries reporting shortages. So these were the aspects that impacted businesses. Now I want to look shortly at the stock market, and we will see that the situation on the stock market looked very differently. In fact, the stock market was the first to recover. Of course, we saw a very big shock in March, April 2020 when stock prices plummeted, but then the situation was recovered already in Q3 and Q4 in the same year, 2020. And we haven't seen low levels as in 2019 ever since then. So the stock market has seen an incredibly strong performance over the past couple of years, and the crisis indeed didn't last very long. So this is important to understand when we look at the final aspect that I want to look at today, which is the society impact of COVID-19. And what we see here is that we have an increasing gap between rich and poor. This is driven, for example, by the unemployment rate. So this was the unemployment rate during the early days of COVID, and we can see that Thailand, which has historically low unemployment rates anyway, doubled in terms of unemployment, or almost tripled compared to pre-COVID-19 in terms of unemployment. And these figures have come down only slowly, only gradually. So we see a slow decrease in unemployment, and we haven't reached pre-COVID-19 levels yet in terms of unemployment. Now the question is, who is unemployed? And people who actually are in the statistics and who have been suffering most are actually the ones who are at the lower level of income. And this is reflected in this statistics that is actually done before the crisis. Two aspects here to highlight. On the left side, we see the share of wealth, of national wealth, held by the richest 1% of the population. And Thailand was considered in this report by Credit Suisse the most unequal country in the world, where 1% of the population holds 67% of the wealth. On the right side, this is turned around a little bit. So here we can see the share of the wealth held by the richest 10% in blue and by the poorest 50% in gray. And we see the development between 2007 and 2018. So the poorest 50% in Thailand held 8.5% of the wealth in 2007, and that went down to 1.7% in 2018. while the richest 10% increased their wealth. So the richest 10% held 51% of the national wealth in 2007, and that number jumped to 85%, almost 86% in 2018. So we see a significant gap in wealth distribution even before the crisis. And as recent reports, this is a newspaper article from 2023, suggests the situation has not improved. On the contrary, the financial crisis has worsened the situation. Why? Because the stock market has done increasingly well, and those people who participate in the stock market are definitely the ones in the top 50 or top 10% of the wealth distribution. And therefore, people who were already in the top 10% probably got wealthier, and those who are in the bottom 50% probably got poorer because of unemployment and because they couldn't participate or didn't participate in the stock market rally that has happened since the COVID-19 pandemic. So in conclusion, COVID-19 is not a topic anymore in everyday life, but the impacts of this crisis still affect us today and are likely to affect us in at least the next couple of months or year to come. That's it from me. Thank you for watching.